In today's fast evolving scientific landscape, one topic consistently draws both curiosity and discussion: vaccines. Regardless of individual opinions, vaccines represent a fundamental aspect of public health strategies worldwide. But what exactly are they? And how do they work? Well, in this exploration, we'll unpack the science behind immunization in a straightforward, balanced way, shedding light on how vaccines prepare our immune systems to recognize and combat disease. What exactly happens when you get injected? Why are they considered one of the greatest breakthroughs in medical history? And perhaps the most common question being asked: are they safe? Well, join us as we dive into the mechanisms of vaccines, offering clear insights on the matter. Welcome to Untangle. I am Amadine Obewe. Welcome back. We've been joined now by an expert, a medical doctor, to break down this issue of how vaccines work. He is Dr. Onuche Audu. Welcome, sir. How are you doing?
Thank you very much.
It's good to have you. So I think let's start from the basics. People get vaccines by having it injected in them mostly, except there's another method. Maybe you can enlighten me.
So now, the question is, how does
When you're injected.
when you're injected or when a vaccine is administered, because
Yeah.
there are different routes by which vaccines can be administered. Majority are administered by injections, which is parenteral route. However, in children, there are some that are administered orally,
Yeah.
like the oral polio vaccine, which is put by mouth, rotavirus also, and a few others are administered by mouth, but the majority of them are injectables. So now, when the vaccines come in contact with the body, when they're administered either orally or by parenteral route, which are the injectables, they work together with the immune system, the antigens which activate to produce antibodies. The body has its own immune system, which some of the components of the immune system are basically from the white blood cells, which are known as the body soldiers or leukocytes. They increase in number when there is contact with infections. So when you acquire an infection naturally, definitely the white blood cells begin to multiply, and their work is to isolate and try to fight off the infection. Now, the principle of vaccine is to introduce a form of this disease, either in an attenuated live form or in dead forms that are still active enough to trigger immune response and fight off the diseases. Some, of course, are much more effective than others because of the research and development and studies that have been done over the years in the laboratories, and there are some that are still in development. So basically, it comes in, activates the immune system to help the body fight off this infection. And under the immune system, we have the white blood cells, which do a lot of the work. Then we have the lymphocytes also, which are part of it, that have the B lymphocytes, the T lymphocytes. The B lymphocytes has memory, such that when you come in contact with these vaccine agents, it gives a memory of them, so that when you eventually acquire this kind of infection in the future, the memory of it, and it helps the body to be able to deal with it much more effectively to fight off the disease.
All right, I just want to restate that last part. Basically, is it the white blood cells that protect you against diseases?
Yes, white blood
They
cells
have
are the body
memories.
soldiers.
And
Yes,
they have
the
memories.
Lymphocytes, the B lymphocytes, the B
Okay.
type, yes, have memory, so that when you've had a disease before, either because you acquired it naturally or because, in this case for vaccines, when the vaccine is administered, it creates the memory in the immune system, such that if one now eventually has this infection, it gives it more potency to be able to fight more effectively the disease. So that's the basic principle of immunology, immunity, and how vaccines work.
Oh, that's really interesting. But is there any difference from a vaccine, quote unquote, induced immunity and one that comes naturally? Because some misconceptions or conceptions based on what you say now that people have is that some of these things are Western made medicine, that they just want to put things in your body, that your body naturally can fight these things. So why do you need some other thing to do that? So is there a difference? Take, for instance, I understand that people who get certain diseases once don't get it again. like I think
Chicken pox, for
chicken pox
example,
and all of
yes,
that. So, is there a difference between that and what the vaccine
it
does?
does. No, definitely. Although but it's a similar thing, it's just that it's just like, for example, like people who conceive, couples who conceive naturally
Mm.
and the assisted reproductive techniques. You understand? So people who conceive naturally don't require anything; they just have intercourse, and of course during the fertile period of the woman, and it happens. Then whether difficulties, probably from tuber blockage or any other cause of infertility, then this is taken, and assisted reproductive technologies, well, like things like IVF and all that are done to acquire this. So now in this case, coming to vaccines and immunity and all that, the natural one which you're asking, when you've been exposed, it's the same phenomenon and principle, but in this case, someone has acquired this infection before. And I told you about the memory of the B lymphocytes,
Yeah.
which has memory. So because the body has acquired this before, it's like some copies of, these microorganisms and all that are already like registered in the body, and the immune system are now been prepared, so that if in the future these same microorganisms come around, the body is well equipped to fight them off. So the natural one is the one that one has acquired the disease before, and the body is prepared to fight off. But it's not in all diseases that the body is strong enough to do this, even though the immune system of the body tries to fight. So in some cases, the vaccines have to come in to also help the body prepare to prevent and fight off these infections in the future. So that natural one for the disease like chicken pox, where it happens and it provides adequate immunity, it's very good. But in cases where other diseases that like tuberculosis, hepatitis, diphtheria, whooping cough, and the like, meningitis, measles, mumps, rubella, and all that, we have vaccines that are usually in the immunization schedule of our country and so many countries of the world. In those cases, these vaccines have to be administered so that they can help fight off disease when eventually one is exposed to them, or at least to prevent their occurrence.
All right, let me paint a scenario here about sometimes why people might be hesitant about vaccines. Take, for instance, let's say two families, two women who have children. One says that I am not going to vaccinate my children. I'm not going to do any of that because we don't need it. There's nothing and all of that. And they stay at home and the child looks okay and all of that. The second one goes to the hospital, gets the immunization, and when they come back, her child seems to have a little bit of fever and all of that. And the first one points to that. You see, I didn't go anywhere. My child is still looking normal. Yours went somewhere. Now they're having fever. Something has happened. Can you describe what happens during that? Where some people not just say, some people tend to have a brief reaction, if not so brief sometimes, when they've just taken vaccines. What's really going on during that period?
Okay, now there's a classification of the vaccines. There are different types of vaccines. Some of them are life attenuated forms. It's like these vaccines or the ailment, the disease, have been taken and worked on in the lab to attenuate it, reduce it, but there are life forms of it. And there are some that are dead forms that have been killed but purified in the lab so that they can work. So it basically is the immune response of the body. Because when this comes here, the body, of course, like I told you about the memory, the antigens triggering the antibodies, all that goes on at the level of the cells of the body to try to help the body fight off the infection. Inflammatory processes, the complement system, the interleukins and the leukocytes and all the formations of phagocytosis or the macrophages trying to eat off some of all these infections. So when all these are going on, definitely there's inflammatory response and the immune system response that will lead to fever, malaise, feeling unwell, and all of that. But it just persists for a few hours or maybe a few days, and with just basic regular treatments of like paracetamol or any other analgesics, those symptoms can be taken care of. But the benefits of the vaccines by far outweigh the temporary malaise or fever or aches or any problem that we perceive to be present in people who have taken vaccines. So mothers are taught to get prepared when their children are going to have certain vaccines so that they have these medications and analgesics available that they've been administered to help deal with these problems. And research and development is ongoing so that there could be improvement. Because one of the basic vaccines that brings a lot of all these symptoms, like the pentavalent vaccine, which prevents 5 basic diseases, the DPT, the diphtheria, tetanus, and pertussis, which is whooping cough, Haemophilus influenza type B, and hepatitis B. So all these 5 diseases can be prevented in one vaccine. And there's been more development and research for a vaccine called the hexazine, which now adds the pneumococcal conjugate vaccine, so preventing 6 basic diseases, and it's been developed to minimize to the barest minimum the symptoms of fever and aches that you could get after receiving shots of these vaccines. So research is going to reduce them, but where they occur, they can be easily managed. And like I said, the benefits by far outweigh any potential risk of taking the vaccines.
That's interesting. 5 in one vaccine.
Yes, 5 and even 6.
Even 6. But there are people who don't have reactions, are there?
Yeah, well, in some cases, because the strength of everyone's immune system is not the same. So some people could take vaccines and may not have reaction, just like regular medications. There are people who react to medications, and there are some that do not necessarily react to medications. So even food, there's certain food substances, seafood and all that, that if they eat them, they begin to have certain kind of immune system reaction and all that. And the people that can eat them and not have any problem. So there are certain differences in our biological makeup as individuals that could be manifested clinically when these vaccines are administered.
All right. There's this idea that the more people take vaccines, somehow it's helping other people. And I think it's put up in the phrase herd immunity.
Yes, definitely.
So we'd like to know more about that and why, a person who feels that if you want the vaccine, take it. I don't know why you're, trying to convince me. Why can't you do your thing and let me be? So what does that really mean? And why is it that more people taking vaccines helps more people?
Yes. Now, herd immunity is achieved when a significant or majority of the population have been vaccinated against a particular disease, because that way you have less people falling ill, and a lot of all these vaccine preventable ailments or diseases are contagious, can be transmitted from people to people. But when you've achieved a significant proportion of the population to be vaccinated against them, it means less people will fall ill, less people will be carrying the disease, and less people will be available to transmit these diseases. They're the ones that are contagious and all that. So basically, that's the principle. So when a lot of people are not having the disease, or basically it's been eradicated from a particular place, then there will not be any host or people to, allow vectors or whichever means by which they are transmitted to complete the life cycle or the transmission chain of these diseases. So basically, that's the principle behind.
So it's like if there's 10 people here and 6 are vaccinated,
yes,
it's harder to spread to the remaining 4 people.
Definitely.
All right, that's fair enough. I think we'll go on a break now. When we return, we'll delve further into the issues of vaccines, perhaps now to the issue of safety and the processes put in place to ensure that before it gets into the people it does. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back.
Hey everyone, let's face it, our world today experiences numerous challenges. And guess what? Our community isn't off the hook either. Most of the world issues are either not talked about enough or never talked about at all. But here on Timeline, we've got you covered. We dive deep into issues that affect us every day, leaving behind footprints of wisdom, knowledge, and solutions. Think of it like a roadmap that keeps you on the track for success. So buckle up, because in this new season of Timeline, we're taking another trip through the past, the present, and navigate into a more promising future. Again, we're talking solutions, people. And let's make one thing clear. This is not your average blah, blah, blah convo. This is real talk with a side of inspiration and a sprinkle of wow. I never thought about it like that. I'm your host on this impactful ride. Together, we'll tackle the tough stuff, laugh a little, and find ourselves on the path to positive change. So what are you waiting for? Season 2 of Timeline will be loaded. Let's get started. Hop in and let's drive straight into the heart of issues shaping our world. Let's go. Oh, one more thing. Hit that subscribe button and let's take this ride together. Every day, amazing stories of hope and tenacity unfold across the globe. On Hued Hour, we dive into these inspiring tales and discuss the vital work being done in the humanitarian and development space. Humanity has never faced a shortage of challenges, yet we rise stronger through teamwork and determination. Though these remedies are often underreported, on Hued Hour, we advocate sustainable solutions. We bring you the latest and most impactful news on how lives are being changed. We engage with young change makers and experts who provide valuable insights into relief efforts and the challenges faced by local communities through a global perspective. Join us every Wednesday by 8 a.m. on Hued Network's YouTube channel as we embark on this journey of positive change.
All right, welcome back. We're still on the issue of untangling how vaccines work. I'm still here with Dr. Onuche Audu. All right, sir, let's move now to the issue of safety of vaccines. People really want to understand what's going on. There have been some incidents that have been referenced that cause some concern or even hesitancy. There's a Qatar incident. There's the incident of even perhaps during the COVID-19 era, although the news was part of the issue, the way it was portrayed. We also have instances where vaccines were recalled. I remember there was a time where the vaccine that was meant to polio vaccine that was meant to even protect you was the one affecting people. Yes, yeah. So all of this being said, how do you let people know that this is still safe? What processes happen so before we get to that final vows that get to the common person?
Okay, good question. I'd like to make a blanket statement that generally vaccines are safe, and because they've been used over the years, it's one of the greatest breakthrough in medical practice, and it helps to prevent in large scale, large number of diseases that are vaccine preventable. That is why the immunization schedule is followed strictly in so many countries, and children, when they are born, they have their immunization cards, and there's a register of all the vaccines they've been taking, the lot number, and the different reasons to identify the production batch and the companies that produce them and the like. Now, because these things are supposed to prevent diseases and all that, these vaccines, a lot is done in the process before the vial finally gets to the patient to whom it's injected to. The first is research and discovery, which takes about 10 to 15 years. In that process, a lot is done. There's a lot of research into it to check for its efficacy, safety, and all of that. And these have been evaluated. So we have regulatory bodies. In the US, of course, we have the FDA. In Nigeria, we have our own NAFDAC. So many other countries have their regulatory bodies. And these bodies try to cooperate amongst themselves because sometimes vaccines are produced in other countries and they have to be transported in cold chain or whichever means to get to other countries that require them. For example, when the COVID-19, which is like the most recent pandemic that we had and all that, so many developed countries developed their vaccines first, then eventually they were now releasing some to, third world countries like countries in Africa and the rest of the world that are third world countries and the like. So because of these rigorous testings and phases that these vaccines go through, as well as other drugs that are invented, it's very rigorous, the testing because these are things that are going to be administered into human beings. So there's the research and development stage, there's the proof of concept. In this case, some of them are tested in animals first, so that you can get a feel of what it will be like before they are used in humans. Then there's the testing of the vaccine, which has the clinical development stage, that's also called clinical trials. And it has up to 4 different phases, which are rigorous testing, takes so many years to pass from one stage to the other. Then it gets approval and all that. Then eventually you have the manufacturing process, approving the vaccine, the combination of the vaccine, monitoring for safety and approval. So these are various stages of development of vaccines, and it takes so many years, except in some cases of pandemics where waivers and emergency use approval are given, like during the COVID. Of course, you don't have to wait so many years to, test the vaccines and go through all these stages. But there were some positive results with some of the vaccines from COVID, even though some of them had their issues and all that. But of course, there's a lot of regulatory bodies whose business or work is to make sure that there's efficacy. And there's what we call pharmacovigilance, such that when these vaccines are applied, first in small groups, report is given feedback constantly so that you can know how safe these vaccines are and how well they are doing. There's constant research and development, evaluation, pharmacovigilance, and all of that to monitor these vaccines, how they are being used, so that if a particular batch of a popular vaccine that has been known is found to be wanting in anything, then that batch can be called back quickly to avoid. And it's been because of litigation. For example, the oral polio vaccine case, I remember not so in Kano, where several children that were vaccinated came out with paralysis and all that. And there have been so many issues concerning it, and it made some people to be afraid of using vaccines and all that, or taking vaccinations. But like I said, the benefits by far outweigh the risks, and any vaccine going into any country must go through the regulatory agencies. In our own case, like NAFDAC, does stringent testings and all that, so that we do not, in the name of trying to prevent diseases, are now giving disease to our children and to people that require them. So,
is there any significant difference between vaccines and perhaps regular medicine, and perhaps why people are more concerned about vaccines going into their bodies than they are about maybe taking other foreign-made drugs?
Okay, yeah, the fear about vaccine is because a good number of vaccines, what they contain is an attenuated form of the disease. In some cases, attenuated life forms of the disease. That's why we say in some cases where there are some errors in the labs and all that, taking the vaccines can, cause the infections that they're supposed to prevent.
Sorry to cut you short. I think this is maybe part of where we need to emphasize, because this is one of the misconceptions that people have about vaccines. Someone who wants to confuse or perhaps, sensationalize the news would tell an uninformed person, do you know these vaccines you are putting in your body has the disease? And that's meant to shock them that, are you serious? You mean that they are putting diseases in our body? So I feel maybe there's a need for emphasis there that truly they are in the vaccine, but I believe you are calling them weaker or dead versions.
Yes, right? Exactly. Attenuated life forms or inactive dead forms of the vaccine. Although in the classification of vaccines, there are some that are proteins, polysaccharides, which are not necessarily the disease, but from antigens that have been, taken from these diseases, or proteins that have been, purified and worked on in the lab.
So just a part of the disease.
Exactly. So in some instances, but there are some that are attenuated life forms. So depending on the classification of the vaccines, there are different types. You have the attenuated life forms, inactive microorganisms, toxoids, conjugate vaccines, different types. So it depends on the classification of the vaccine or the vaccine in question. I don't make you know which, but in principle, generally, it is forms of the disease that are put so that it can create an immune response, the memory that it creates so that when one gets infected, eventually, this can fight, But for the ones that have been used over and over the years, especially the ones in our immunization schedule that are not new to us, those ones, of course, people trust them more because they've been with us for so many years and people have seen the effects of these vaccines, so they can be trusted more, can be used. But of course, research and development is ongoing to improve the ones we have and for newer ones to be made also.
But generally, are there diseases that cannot have vaccines, or it's just a case of science hasn't gotten there yet?
Okay, well, I'd rather go with that science hasn't gotten there yet, but it doesn't mean that research and development is not ongoing.
So
For
it doesn't mean
example,
all diseases are potentially vaccine preventable.
for infectious diseases, basically,
Infectious, okay.
exactly. But like I said, that we could have vaccines that are therapeutic and prophylactic. Prophylactic being for prevention, while therapeutic for treatment.
Mm.
You understand? So basically, for example, for HIV/AIDS, we don't have the vaccines yet, but we have antiretroviral medications which help to bring down the viral load.
Mm.
But I'm sure probably research and development will be ongoing in labs of prestigious universities abroad and at home, working on, because whoever can successfully bring a vaccine that can prevent HIV or cure it or whatever, of course, it will be a breakthrough in modern science and it will attract the world's attention and all that. So definitely it's a big challenge for me to work towards, and I believe people are working towards that also.
But in this case, when we talk about research, development, and all of that, can you let us know the aspect of the financial aspect of all of this? Because usually, especially in developing nations, people get to have these vaccines mostly free and given to them. But I assume there must be a lot of money going into all of this, isn't there?
Yeah,
And how does that
definitely.
work? Yeah.
Definitely, of course, in developed countries and all that, there are people who are willing to go into research and have research grants, which are much more than if they were even doing normal work and earning a salary. And a lot of all these are funded by governments of these countries or a lot of foundations that have certain interests. Because eventually, if these cures of uh, diseases that are temporarily incurable at the moment are found, then of course, it's a money spinner for the pharmaceutical industry and all that. So something that, of course, it's like a big business in the pharmaceutical industry around the whole world. Big companies like Pfizer, Novartek, and so many uh, companies that produce a lot of the medications that we use in our country, both vaccines or the regular pharmaceuticals and all that. So the research and development is constantly ongoing so that they can find new cures and new treatment options for various ailments and diseases.
All right. So two questions in one now about who can take vaccines. We've mentioned about vaccines schedule that involves children and kids.
Yes.
We also know that there are some vaccines that indicate that after this certain age,
Yes.
things
Or
like
every
that.
10 years.
Yes. And then also on the flip side, just two in one question, if you can unbundle them. When it comes to the storage of these vaccines, I remember during the COVID era, there was concern that a particular vaccine required a level of temperature that needed to be very cold.
Chain,
and people wondered if you are bringing this into countries that are in the equator, how does that work and all of that. So those two issues, who can take vaccines? Are there people who can't take vaccines and why? And also the storage of vaccines.
Yes, okay. So you see, the efficacy of the vaccine depends also on the state or the health of one's immune system. And there are a lot of diseases, especially infectious diseases, that affect the immune system, like HIV and AIDS, the acquired immune deficiency syndrome, or human immune deficiency virus, AIDS, HIV and AIDS. So basically, in HIV patients, their immune system is already well affected. So in those cases, a lot of vaccines that they may not be able to take because it will go down to put a lot of, pressure on their immune system, and the immune system is not able to fight off. But of course, with the advent of antiretroviral medications and people's viral load being reduced, various minimum, and all that, the CD4 counts and all the various parameters that we check when we are trying to monitor the health status of HIV patients being taken care of. But generally, it's people that have issues with their immune system. But aside that, healthy people and people who've not had previous known or fatal reactions to previous vaccines should be able to take vaccines. So from birth, newborn children, there's the BCG at birth. BCG is for prevention of tuberculosis, hepatitis vaccine. You have, of course, the ones for meningitis, and the various categories A, B, C type of meningitis.
Well, sorry to cut in, but wouldn't we say that children or even babies have weaker immune systems than adults? It seems to put all that in them at such
Yes,
a
that's
young
why
age.
there are different stages, because you not say, oh, you wait for them to grow, because some of this immunity begins to build up from when they're children. So you introduce this because, of course, like I said, these are things that are like, there are life forms that are attenuated or dead and all that. So they go in there to create that memory. Because a newborn child, I mean, in an ideal setting where people go the extra length to make sure that the environment where the newborn will be, apart from the hospital to the home, is clean, it's free from infections. People make sure that people wash their hands before they can carry the children. We use hand sanitizers and so many things. Babies are wrapped in so many layers of clothing and all that to try to prevent and all that. So basically, children can have so that as they are growing, of course, their immunity is building up and all of that. But now, in the elderly, basically, or those who have HIV/AIDS are specific to those ones, then their immune system is affected. You understand? And there's some level of immunity that children can have even from their parents, because the mother, especially who carries them in the womb, and of course, the exchange in blood transfusion and blood circulation and all that would have passed some antibodies also to babies to help them prevent disease and all that.
So speaking about mothers, are there vaccines that perhaps some other persons, like pregnant women, cannot take, or is that something that is not really an issue of concern?
Okay, basically in pregnancy, the vaccine that's of course recommended that pregnant women take, which is the TT, the tetanus vaccine. Normally, if taken with the proper scheduling and timing, 5 doses spread across a lifetime should be taken. But most pregnant women are not disciplined enough, sorry to say, to complete the 5 doses. So if they don't complete it in time and form, then eventually they may have to start afresh. But if they take the first one from them, for example, between the first and second dose, there's like a month apart, then some other time like that, keep spreading until they complete the 5 basic doses. So for that, they can take the TT vaccines and that they'll be fine.
All right. The question of storage is still there, but before we go back to that, your question about dosage brought up another issue, which is I know some vaccines have 2 doses, some have 1 at a time, but you just spoke about not completing a vaccine.
Yes, that's especially for the TT in pregnant women.
Is there a consequence to that? And sometimes, why are they even spread in that manner? Is it for protection?
Yes, so that eventually if they can get that 5, then at least that would be enough for life and all that. Although in adult children, they say the tetanus vaccine can be taken every 10 years and all of that, But sometimes
that means the protection can expire sometimes.
Yes, protection but that is why sometimes you require booster doses and all that, because the effect could wear off over time in some vaccines, so that it's required that booster doses are given eventually to help. For example, like for seasonal flu and things like that, booster doses. And because of mutation in these microorganisms that cause these infectious diseases, so they have to have like updated versions of these vaccines so that you can have proper protection. And of course, because research and development is always ongoing, new things have been discovered. So some instances when new things are discovered, of course, you have to leave the old practices and adopt the new ones.
All right. So you were saying when you miss some doses,
the TT vaccine in pregnant women.
Is there any consequence?
But the consequence would now be that eventually if the woman gets pregnant again, then she now have to start afresh. So if you complete it, then of course you'd have taken your 5 doses and you now rest from it. But if not, then of course you have to start afresh, which is cumbersome and all that. So I did forget about the question about storage. Basically, we talk about the cold chain. So a lot of these vaccines are brought from Europe, America, many other developed countries where these are cold, but some of them are flown in or shipped, and whichever way they come in, they try to maintain the cold chain. I've been involved in the transaction in terms of the vaccine supply from one country to Nigeria. And the airline that's supposed to fly the vaccines into Nigeria said that the airports where they're going to land, that they should try to tell the people who are buying the vaccines to try to make arrangements for cold chain, because they could guarantee cold chain from the country up to where they were transiting in Europe, down, because coming from the Americas, So from there to Europe, to the airport here in Nigeria. But subsequently, if there were no provisions for cold chain facilities, then of course these vaccines could be denatured and the efficacy will no longer be the same as when it was supplied. So they have to inform.
Can they become harmful though?
Well, of course, definitely, because it's just like when you store certain things in the fridge, they can be preserved for a longer time when they are frozen and kept in the fridge than when you just leave them like that. So the similar thing with these vaccines, because it has the temperature range, some say maybe minus this degree or this particular degree. So it's a requirement to have that cold chain facility, so that when the vaccines eventually arrive, they can be put in there and preserved and definitely safe for posterior administration to those that require it.
There's a word you mentioned before, a new word to me. I think you call it, is it
Pharmacovigilance.
Pharmacovigilance. Does that include perhaps after these vaccines are received, retesting them before they are finally administered?
No, the testings are done different when they are brought in, but for pharmacovigilance, basically what that tries to achieve is that if there's any, both for vaccines or even for regular medications, as these medications have been administered or vaccines have been administered, if there's any adverse reaction or anything, they are reported, so that the authorities can take them in mind and they can maybe call for those batches to check if there's any, just like maybe like after sales, guarantee and monitoring.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Audu. It's been an interesting one. And just like you said, that some vaccines, I just learned that today, require renewal
booster doses
after a while. Perhaps maybe we can have another episode if perhaps there are new updates on this whole idea of vaccines and how they work to further enlighten the public and untangle these issues. Thanks so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
All right. So that's there we have it on the matter of untangling how vaccines work. We've been able to break it down, who can take vaccines, when, how it works in your body, what exactly the vaccine is doing, and the processes it has to pass through to ensure that whatever gets to you is safe for use. And even at that, to still have vigilance being done to ensure that if there are issues that may arise after vaccines have been administered, they are quickly nipped in the bud. And I think this completely breaks down the cycle and the system and how it works and why perhaps you should consider getting into that vaccine schedule. Again, don't forget that these things require some level of study and knowledge to understand how it works. You can always expect to get that here on Untangle. Do join us next time where we'll be breaking down more concepts, more issues that are shrouded, rather perhaps in mystery, perhaps within secrecy and misconceptions. We'll be here to break them all down for you. If you have any of those, leave them in the comment section, and next time we'll be sure to untangle it. Bye for now. I'm Amadine Uberi.